What is up, everybody? Welcome back to the Raw Prospect Podcast. Welcome to episode 87. Joining me from Austin, Texas, the Stat King himself, Michael Wing. What is up?
Welcome back, everybody. Episode 87. This is our college football playoff preview. This is our New Year's Six bowl previews, and this is some NBA talk. So welcome back. We had a rough episode, not necessarily a rough episode. The content was good. It was just we had some fun mixed in, and some problems we ran into. But anywho, we're here now. It's going to be a more professional episode, if you will, and we're going to get into everything you need to know for this next 48 hours of college football, both tomorrow, New Year's Eve, and then New Year's Day for the New Year's Six Bowls. And we're going to be asking 3 burning NBA questions. But before we get to all that, we're going to start with the monologue. And Emmy has something that he has had on his mind for a little bit now, and it has to do with the NBA. So why not we just hand it over to him and let him say what's on his mind?
Right. Yeah. Basically, it comes down to the fact that I think the last month or so of the NBA season has been almost unwatchable outside of a couple games here and there. I mean, I'd say the Warriors-Suns games have some consequential value leading to the playoffs later this year. But other than that, I mean, it's clear that, over the past few years, it's a known fact that viewership has been down for the NBA. And really, it just comes down to, one, there's too many games. 2, there's a lack of effort that's there's entire stretches of games where players aren't showing the ultimate amount of effort, I'd say. And it shows, and that's what a lot of people say is better about college basketball, is just the effort night to night. But that's a whole conversation for another day. The third thing is that in the age of social media, where you have access to everything, why not just watch the highlights, right? Right now there's so many games to where the value in taking the time to watch each and every game is just diminished completely. It's made even worse by what's going on with the COVID protocols and everything like that. But even without that problem would still linger. I just think the COVID protocols are actually pronouncing it a bit more. And for me as a Mavericks fan, these past few years before this, I was what you'd consider a diehard fan. I would watch basically every single game that I would get the chance to watch. I would listen to the Locked On Mavs podcast after every game, basically taking a ton of Mavs content every single day, Mavs Twitter, whatever the case may be. And this year, I don't feel engaged as a fan. I feel like it's hard to be engaged. I find myself having to force myself to watch, because I know that, specifically for us, as long as we hang around 500, none of this stuff right now is going to matter. If we hang around 500 and then we get healthy and go on a run in March, none of this stuff in December and prior matters at all, So, and I have a couple examples of that, actually. Think back to the Utah team from a few years ago that was, I believe, like 7 or 8 games under 500 going into February, and then boom, went on a run, made the second round. There's other examples as well, but the point is the NBA needs to do something about keeping fans engaged and making sure the product is enjoyable throughout the entire season, because right now it's getting very dull, in my mind. I saw a report that there's a new push towards adding an in-season tournament. That would be interesting, but I don't know if that would really fix the problem. I think that would just put a band-aid on a gun wound, you know? So the real issue lies with having far too many games. And until the NBA addresses that, all of the other stuff that they do to try to mitigate that problem is not going to matter, in my mind. Do you have any thoughts on this?
Well, yes, I do. First of all, we all talk about, the NFL and how it's grown to be so popular. Back in I'm a big sports nerd and a sports historian. Back in the, bless you, back in the 70s in the 80s, it was, well, actually 60s and 70s, early 80s. It was the NFL in baseball competing to be the national, like the sport that everyone watches, because way back when, before those times, it was baseball. That was our national pastime. But then the rise of the NFL, and so now with social media, as you said, we live in a very distracted society. People have shorter attention spans. They're not going to sit down and watch the Sacramento Kings and Los Angeles Lakers play on a Wednesday night. People have lives, right? They're on social media, they have jobs, they have families to attend to, it's not, but that's aside the point. The point is the NFL has separated themselves so much because of the sense of urgency. That's why football is so great and why it's the most popular sport in terms of not only viewership, but just popularity amongst the general American public. And it was proven. I can give you multiple examples, but I'll just give you one recently. And I know it's sort of unfair to compare the NBA at this time of year to the NFL, or any sport for that matter to the NFL. Because as we say, the NFL is the sun and all other sports are just, the planets rotating around the sun. The NFL is the king of TV. NFL and NBA, as we know, went head to head on Christmas Day. Okay. The Packers-Browns game, okay, that was played on Christmas Day started at 3:30 Eastern time. Or no, 4:30 Eastern time, 3:30 Central time. On Fox and NFL Network. It got 28.6 million viewers. That Warriors-Suns matchup, which I would say was the best game on Christmas Day, started 30 minutes later. It got 5 million viewers. So the NFL game got about 7 times as many viewers as the NBA game. We moved to later on, the Lakers-Nets game. I know there was no KD. I know there was no, a lot of players were missing, but you can say the same thing about the NFL. They're going through the same type of COVID issues, injuries, all that stuff. So that's not an excuse. 5.7 million viewers for the Lakers-Nets, and then Colts-Cardinals, 12.6 million viewers. So not quite as many, but still double the NBA. So you can clearly see in terms of viewership, there's an issue there because of the sense of urgency. 82 games is way too much. I say, an easy solution would be to start the season on Christmas. That easily eliminates about 30 games. And now you're down to about a 55 game season, 56 game season. And that would easily, I think, improve at least the sense of urgency aspect to this, because that's why the NFL is so great on television, because every week matters. You only get one game, right? And then in college football, say what you want about the NCAA and all the issues there, but if you lose a game in college football, you're basically out of it. Your college football playoff hopes, unless you're one of these bigger schools that plays a really tough schedule like Alabama, and you're able to, win your conference, you're done if you lose a game on any given Saturday. And there are only 12 opportunities. So, and, you gave the example of the Jazz team, and I'm sure there are many more examples, but, we talked about it last night, and we talked about it back when the World Series ended. Look at the Braves. The same problem exists in baseball to a larger extent. 162 games is way, way, way too many. A game every day, basically, when you look at it. It's worse than the NBA. But the Braves, they were able to, they were terrible for most of the year. For about 70% of the regular season, they were awful. Absolutely terrible. And they made a run. Nothing that happened from the very start of spring training to the very start of August, that span of about 6 months mattered. All that was a waste. So I just think, and I could go on and on for days. We're not going to do this. We can save the arguments for potential solutions to this for another podcast. I think it would be a great discussion. But I think it comes down to sense of urgency. That's really what it is. And that's why I think an easy solution would be to just eliminate 25, 30 games, start on Christmas Day or maybe even New Year's, and then just go from there. Because then at least, you start the season, you get some, you get the attention that you need because it's the start of the season. You have to compete with the NFL playoffs. That's not so great. But then after that, it really opens up for you to really dominate the landscape of the sports world. So look, I still love to watch the NBA, but there is a definite problem, and there has been now for years, in terms of the regular season product on the court. And COVID isn't really helping that at all. I think without COVID, it would probably be a little bit better. But I definitely see what you're saying, and we can talk about this more on a future podcast.
Right. And of course, you can't really have the conversation without mentioning that the money involved with the owners losing X amount of home games as well. So that's really what's keeping them from cutting out a lot of games. But I think at the end of the day, I think overall it would help the NBA. So, I mean, I hope they can do it at some point, but for now, we're going to move on to our NBA discussion. So we're going to discuss 3 burning questions we have that are intriguing to us. And this is a segment that I think we can bring back as the NBA season progresses further, and as it heats up a little bit more. But the 3 questions today is 1, what's wrong with the Lakers? 2, what's wrong with the Blazers? And 3, my favorite question of the 3, in my opinion, is it time to take the Bulls seriously? So, starting with the Lakers, what do you think? I'll let you go ahead.
Well, it's a difficult question. There are so many, I think, factors that are playing into this, but it's interesting because the Lakers, they're 1-5 in their past 6 games, right? They've been struggling for a good amount of time now. It appears, lots of those players, including LeBron himself, are visibly frustrated, and rightfully so. But 1-5 over the past 6 games, and LeBron is averaging, I think, 35 over those 6 games. He's playing, out of his mind, reminding everybody that he still can do it. Maybe not at the level that he once did, but he still has enough in the tank. Number one, I think injuries haven't helped, but that's no excuse. Everyone deals with that. AD is going to be out for at least a month more now, so that definitely doesn't help. Number two, there's no continuity, and number three, frankly, I think they're just slow and not athletic. You see it against some of these younger teams. They're just not. You have to have that. They have the veteran presence, but I don't think they have the youthful presence that some of these other teams have, like the I don't know, you name it. The Suns have that. They have the veteran in Chris Paul, but then they have the youngsters and like Mikal Bridges and DeAndre Ayton. And you look at the Warriors as well. So they have youngsters coming off the bench, Gary Payton II, or I can go on and on.
Right.
I think if I had to name 3 main issues, and I didn't do a whole ton of research, I focused my mind for this episode on the college football stuff, which we'll get to later. But just watching the Lakers games, I have watched some. I just think it's lack of continuity because of the injuries, COVID, all that stuff. And I think you have to have, I think it's a key ingredient. If you look at the successful teams right now, you have to have that youthful presence, those young athletic players. And I frankly don't think the Lakers have that. I think they're slow on defense. They're slow on the perimeter, and they don't shoot the ball particularly well. But you know better than me. What do you think?
In my personal opinion, I think it's really just the wings that they have on the floor, or just the defense at the point of attack. If you look at the guards that they have in the lineup most of the time, it's guys like Taylor Horton Tucker, Malik Monk, Avery Bradley, guys who aren't how should I say this? Aren't really the big and strong type, I guess. So they really get exposed in certain matchups. For example, last night against the Grizzlies, basically Desmond Bane was able to put Malik Monk in the post multiple times and get his mid-range jumper off. Little things like that, just the personnel problems, that's kind of unfixable. That stuff is, well, I mean, it's just, it kind of is what it is, just the defense. It's the biggest problem to me. And for me, when you look at the Westbrook trade, and you look at what they traded, it was, for one, KCP, a guy who they relied on in that championship run to not only be a great shooter. I mean, I get that he was inconsistent, but most of the time he was a great shooter. And two, a defender at the point of attack. And the thing that's missing right now for this team that was there in that 2020 run is those wing defenders, those 3-and-D guys that just hang their hat on shooting 3-ball and playing defense. They don't have those guys. and they're really missing that presence right now. I think they could make a move in the buyout market. I think that would be interesting to see later in the season. But I think a lot of the problems they have are going to be really tough to fix because their offense is already good, and there's only so many points you can score when you're not getting stops at the other end.
Right. That's exactly right. I think I largely agree with that. I just think they're slow and not athletic on the perimeter. I think continuity is, a easy thing to say. But, a lot of teams deal with that. I think LeBron will eventually be able to figure that out later on in the season and they'll be okay. They probably will at least be in the play-in tournament. And if not, maybe sneak into the playoffs as like a 5 or a 6 seed, the way I see things playing out. But that's a totally different conversation for another day. But I think it can all be chalked up to a bunch of issues piling up upon themselves. But we focus. We want to move this conversation along so we have enough time to get to all the football that we have to talk about. To our next question, what is wrong? It's a similar question. What is wrong with the Portland Trailblazers?
I guess I can start this one off. Well, it's a combination of a lot of things. It all goes back to the really cliche saying that you hear a lot. The definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over and expecting a different result. So basically, they kept the core guys from this last Blazers team together and just shifted around the edges, expecting it to fix itself at the core of it. But it really just only delays the sinking ship. And it's from the looks of it right now, it's pretty much dead in the water. Enough with the analogies. That's enough. But the big key really with the Blazers is it's not about Damian Lillard and CJ McCollum being undersized. It's not about that. It's just the entire team's lack of defensive versatility, I'd say. I mean, they have some, right? They have Robert Covington, they have Larry Nance. They made an effort to add that. But I think trading for a guy like Norman Powell to play the 3 just really showed me how backwards this team's philosophy is. I really scratched my head at that move at the time, and I'm still scratching my head at it because really, if you're gonna run a 6'2" point guard with a 6'3" shooting guard, aren't you gonna want to combat that with like a 6'8" small forward? I mean, that's what I would think, but no, they picked up Norman Powell, who is basically the same size as CJ McCollum, 6'3" or 6'4". So you can't expect to guard at a high level when 3 of the guys on the court are extremely undersized. Like whenever you're going to have to rotate underneath and the low defender is Norman Powell, I mean, that's a bucket every time. You can't expect that to be stopped ever unless it's a charge or something like that. But you can't expect to get a charge every time because in order to get a charge, the rotation has to be perfect and it has to be timed perfectly. And you can't do that every single time. So that just really limits this team. And, it's a shame because I actually like some of the young guys they have. Anthony Simons is a really good player off the bench. Nas Little has shown some good things this year. But it's just not cohesive right now.
Yeah, things are ugly in the Pacific Northwest. Portland Trailblazers, Seattle Seahawks, you name it. I think, it's hard because they got rid of Terry Stotts. They hired Chauncey Billups. I think that will end up working out. But it came at a bad time. This is a poor roster construction, in my opinion. I mean, when you have a top 10 talent like Damian Lillard, it masks a lot of your issues. The things he's able to do on a nightly basis, and some of the superhuman things he's capable of as the 6-foot point guard that he is, shooting extraordinaire that he is. I have said before in this podcast, and I know it's not all about the size and all that stuff, but I have said before in this podcast that if the goal is in fact to win a championship long term, then I do not think that you can do that with the combination of Damian Lillard and CJ McCollum. I just don't think it can happen. It's too much of the same thing, and in the backcourt, I just don't think you can win a championship that way. Now, we've seen that if you just want to get to the playoffs, maybe win a playoff series, maybe make an occasional run to the Western Conference Finals. If that's your standard, well, that's fine. They can do that for you. But, I don't know what the standard is. I think they want to win a championship. I think they've had some changes in the front office. I don't know exactly. That's probably hasn't helped. They've had some contention, I guess is the word in there, with the general manager or president of basketball operations. I don't know exactly the situation there. That probably doesn't help. But I think it's just problems within the organization at the higher up level, and then roster construction is poor. If you look at it right now, where they sit, they're 13-21, 8 games below 500. They've lost 3 straight in 10 of their last 12. So it's really gotten ugly here as of late. They have been shorthanded. CJ McCollum has been out, dealing with, I believe, a collapsed lung or something along those lines.
Right. Yeah.
I believe they've been missing Nurkic for a certain period of time. So that certainly hasn't helped. Last night in a loss to the Jazz, they were outscored by 44 points in the paint, which is very alarming to me. But I think it's a lot of things. If you look at it, they could still easily, with the talent that they have. You mentioned some of the young talent that they have coming off the bench. I really like Anthony Simons as well. They could easily probably, fix this or fix some of the issues, and maybe make a push and be a dangerous team come the play-in tournament. They're not that far out from that. But I just don't. I think there's a lot of issues that need to be resolved. And come the trade deadline, I think Portland's going to be a really interesting team to monitor. But that's a different discussion for another day.
Right. Okay. Yeah, just to close that out, I don't see this getting better anytime soon for the Blazers. I do see a little bit of hope on the Lakers front because of how much star talent they have, and you just think eventually they'll kind of go on a little bit of a run, but with the Blazers, it's kind of hard to see that. But yep, moving along to the last of our 3 questions. Is it time to take the Bulls seriously? So currently the Bulls sitting in the 2 seed. They've had a little bit of struggles with Zach LaVine going into COVID protocols. They've had a few guys going to COVID protocols, as have many of the teams in the NBA. That's not really an excuse at this point. Everybody's got that. But still, it's worth noting. But still, even with that, I mean, this team they've been fantastic. And, they've not only won a lot, they've also been one of the most entertaining teams in the NBA, in my opinion. I mean, their combination of scoring prowess with just two guys who are able to get to their spots at will, with DeMar DeRozan and Zach LaVine. That combination with the passing of Lonzo Ball and the fast break, their ability to get steals and get out and run, it all culminates together to a really well-oiled machine. So the real question is, when you talk about taking this team seriously, is can we take them seriously in the playoffs? Because we know at this point that they're obviously a good regular season team from what we've seen so far. They're clearly one of the best teams in the league, not just record-wise, but just eye test alone. You can see that. And to me, the answer to that question about them in the playoffs is it all comes down to, is Vucevic going to be a liability in the pick and roll? That's kind of what it comes down to in my eyes. Because if you look at it from this perspective, if you're playing somebody like, say, the Hawks in the playoffs, right? Trae Young is going to attack Vucevic every single time, and rightfully so. I mean, that Trae Young Clint Capella pick and roll is really, really good. But are you going to be able to trust Vucevic to be able to defend that properly? Because we know DeMar DeRozan struggles in the playoffs, and I think he's at a point in his career where he can kind of get past that and play well, but at the same time, it's just a lot of question marks still. The answer is I don't know right now. I think I still need to see more of Vucevic on the floor, because right now all we've really seen is just like about a month, because before that he got injured, and before he had gotten injured he was playing awful. So we're gonna have to wait and see. But I do like how this team is constructed, with their defensive guards and with those two scorers. And I do think Zach LaVine is a legit guy. And I would expect him to play well in the playoffs, but we don't know, So.
Well, the first thing I'll say is, to answer this question, I need to know what we mean by take this team seriously. Does that mean win a playoff series? Does that mean get to the Eastern Conference Finals, or actually be a threat to actually go to the finals? What do we mean by take this team seriously?
Well, in my eyes, that would mean get to the Eastern Conference Finals and threaten to win the series at the very least.
Well, if that's the case, I think I'd err on the side of no, because as I've been saying so many times with these either newly constructed teams with new players, a bunch of new pieces, or just teams that don't have a whole lot of playoff experience on their roster, whether it's the NBA or the NFL, I have to see it to believe it, right? And I know that's not the answer people want to hear, but it's the truth. I do think the way they're currently constructed, and I do agree with you. I love the construction of the team. I do think they could use some more size off the bench, but you can easily find that at the trade deadline or off waivers or
buyout market or anything.
buyout market. I don't worry about that too much. And the Vucevic point that you made, I think, is excellent. But do I think this team could get to the Eastern Conference Finals? Yes. But as we know in the playoffs, they certainly have the talent. I mean, if I know it's 1 month, but if Zach LaVine, DeMar DeRozan, Nikola Vucevic produce at anywhere close to the rate that they were producing this month of December, then yes, they could definitely be a threat to get to the Eastern Conference Finals and maybe even win it. But as we know in the playoffs, it's all about matchups. It's all about who you face.
Right.
So that will have to be answered at a later date, whether or not they could actually threaten to win that series. Because I do think it largely depends on who they end up facing. And, of course, who has the home court advantage, right? Who is the higher seed, that sort of thing. But if you look at it right now, the way they are playing right now, you'd have to say yes. Zach LaVine in December, basically 30 points per game, 6.5 assists, 5.5 rebounds, 52% from the field, 47% from three. Just absolutely fantastic. DeMar DeRozan, though, even better, 31 points per game, 5 assists, 5 rebounds, 56% from the field, 80% from three. Nikola Vucevic, double machine, 19 points per game, 11 rebounds per game, 44% from three. To add on to that big three, you mentioned it, they have the element of passing, they have defense, they have youth coming off that bench and Kobe White. Right. And they're overall the most efficient team in the NBA offensively. They lead the league in 3-point percentage, they lead the league in free throw shooting percentage, and they lead the league in just field goal shooting percentage. So there's nothing you can say to say they're not the most efficient, at least offense, in the NBA. And right now, the way they're playing and the way that, this team is constructed, I say, yes, they could get to the Eastern Conference Finals, but once they get there, it all depends on who they face, in my opinion. And I think, we'll see. But the last thing I'll say is, I just think when it all comes down to it, I'm happy for the city of Chicago, because this is, with everything that's going on with the Cubs right now, they're in a rebuild. The Bears obviously are in purgatory, and some of the other teams. I'm happy for the city of Chicago to see their beloved Bulls back into playing like they are. And one other thing I'll say is this is Zach LaVine's 8th year in the NBA. Think about this. 8th year playing in the NBA. And last night, I think the Bulls are on like a 5-game winning streak. It's the first 5-game winning streak that Zach LaVine has ever had in the NBA. Isn't that incredible?
Wow.
Wow. So that's my answer. They're very efficient, well-constructed team. They're well coached. They play with energy night in, night out. They have elements that I like: the defense on the perimeter, the youth, the scoring, the passing, the distributor, the bench. But if this all continues, definitely they could go there. But once they get there, I think it's all about who you face.
Yeah, and with what you said about the wing depth and the wing size, there actually have been rumors that they're interested in Jeremy Grant. So
I would I would not be opposed to that.
Yeah, I would really like that move.
But don't worry, we're going to definitely here very soon get into our all-star ballots, our trade deadline predictions, and all that sort of stuff. Much more to come with the NBA. But that's going to conclude this segment, the 3 burning questions segment that, as Emmy said, we will bring back at some point because I think this was a really fun segment and some good discussion involved.
Right.
But with that, we have to move on. It is about, I don't know, what is it, like 14 hours from kickoff of the first college football playoff semifinal. Tomorrow are the college football playoff semifinals. But before I think we get into those games, I say we start, excuse me, with the New Year's Day games, the other games, and then we'll finish off with the semifinals. The 3 games we're going to talk about, the Sugar Bowl between Ole Miss and Baylor, the PlayStation Fiesta Bowl between Notre Dame and Oklahoma State, and then the Rose Bowl, the granddaddy of them all, between Ohio State and Utah. So which matchup would you like to start with?
Anyway, I have no preference. Whichever one you're feeling.
Okay, well, let's start with the earliest game, and that's the PlayStation Fiesta Bowl at noon on New Year's Day, Saturday, that is, in Glendale, Arizona, at State Farm Stadium, where the Arizona Cardinals play. You have Notre Dame 11-1 during the regular season, going up against the Big 12 runner-ups in Oklahoma State, who just fell short of beating Baylor and possibly making the college football playoff if they were to win that game, the Big 12 championship, a couple weeks back. So, Emmy, you have Marcus Freeman, the new head coach, making his coaching debut. You have him going up against another brilliant defensive mind in Jeff Knoll, the defensive coordinator over there at Oklahoma State. 2 really good defenses. However, you do have some opt-outs for Notre Dame. These bowl games don't come without some opt-outs. They're all-American safety, going to be a high pick in this upcoming draft. Kyle Hamilton, he is opted out. And then also for Notre Dame on the other side of the ball, Kyron Williams, their highly touted running back, their leading rusher, has also opted out. So what are your initial thoughts on this game? What do you think?
I think these teams actually match up pretty interestingly, because if you think about what has held Notre Dame back the last few years, it's that speed, it's the skill positions. They've always had the offensive line, they've always had the defensive line, they've always had pretty good defense for the most part. It's always just been the skill position talent, the speed, and just having that explosiveness as an offense. That's been their biggest problem. And that's going against the Oklahoma State team, who is actually playing a very similar type of ball with their defense this year. So I honestly, I'm going to lean on what you're thinking here. I think this is a coin flip.
Yeah, it's certainly an interesting matchup. I think the most intriguing storyline is definitely Marcus Freeman. You had all these other schools, LSU, USC, Oklahoma, Miami, Oregon, all these household name programs. They went out they went out and bought their head coach, right? From another program. But I find it interesting because those coaches aren't able to coach in these bowl games for their new schools yet. However, Marcus Freeman, he was promoted by the Notre Dame higher ups, if you will, administration, and he's going to be coaching this team, making his coaching debut in a New Year's Six bowl. So I think that's certainly interesting. For those of you who don't know a lot about Marcus Freeman and his story, there's a great, I haven't read it yet, but I know there's a great article out there written by Pete Thamel at Yahoo about his journey and how he's risen to basically taking, his first ever head coaching job at Notre Dame at 35 years old. It's not often you see a guy like that get that sort of job right off the bat, but I think that's certainly something to watch. He represents a new energy and shift in tone overall, a new style from Brian Kelly. Not that Brian Kelly was bad or a problem or anything, but it's definitely a change in style and a new voice there. So it's going to be interesting to see that. And obviously, you're not going to make any determinations based off this one game because, you're not playing with the full roster and it's a bowl game. So we just don't know. But it's certainly interesting storyline going in. But in terms of the game, both these teams have really good defenses. It certainly doesn't help that Notre Dame is going to be missing the linchpin in their defense and Kyle Hamilton. We're going to be talking about him a ton once, the season concludes and we start talking about the draft. He's going to be high up on draft boards come draft day, but the defense is good. You can say the same thing about Jim Knowles in Oklahoma State. Very good defense. Even in that loss to Baylor, they only gave up 242 yards of total offense. And, Oklahoma was the only team that was able to muster more than 375 yards on Oklahoma State's defense. Great front seven, opportunistic in the secondary. I do favor Oklahoma State a little bit in this game, given that they don't have as many opt-outs on the offensive side of the ball. And I do like Spencer Sanders as the better quarterback in this game, given that he doesn't make the turnovers that he did in some of those games later in the season and in the Big 12 championship game. But you look at the Cowboys defense leading the nation in sacks and tackles for loss, a defense that gave up 278 yards per game the whole season, playing in an offensive driven conference like the Big 12, where you have to face offensive coaches like Lincoln Riley, or you did Steve Sarkisian. These high powered offenses, even Texas Tech can be put into that equation. I do like Oklahoma State just because they were 4 inches away from possibly going to the college football playoff. However, I won't be surprised at all if Notre Dame is able to win this game. I just think it comes down to quarterback play and then which team is better at converting red zone trips into touchdowns, because both defenses are great. So that's what I think it comes down to ultimately. But if you're going to be watching this game, I encourage you to beforehand go read that article about Marcus Freeman. His story is really something to behold. But if you don't have anything else to add, we'll transition quickly.
I just want to say, I think it's really weird that when a coach takes a new job in college football, they don't stay and coach their last game for the team for the bowl game. They just leave, and then the new guy steps in. I think that's a little bit. It's very unique compared to all the other sports basically in the world. So I just thought that was pretty interesting, and that really came to a head the other day when I saw Oklahoma with Bob Stoops coaching for them that game. It was just like,
Well, I
wow.
think a lot of it has to come down to recruiting with the early signing day, and if you keep the coach there, it really affects. You want to get the new coach in there to be able to, you know, recruit as much as you can, keep the guys in that current recruiting class there, uh, and not really have that spoiled voice. But that's a whole nother conversation for another day.
Yeah,
We'll,
yeah.
we'll move on to the Rose Bowl. Ohio State going up against Utah. I think this is a really interesting matchup, albeit that Ohio State has some opt-outs on the offensive side of the ball. Their top receivers, Chris Olave and Garrett Wilson, have already opted out and declared for the upcoming NFL draft. However, I still think this is a really interesting matchup. What do you think here in terms of Utah and Ohio State? Just give us what you know.
Well, it comes down to the war in the trenches. That's really all it is because Utah, I mean, we saw them punk a Oregon team twice this past year or this year uh, in the regular season and in the Pac-12 championship in really impressive fashion. And what is Ohio State struggled with in their losses? It's just the war in the trenches. It's the same thing. Um, so really, if it does end up being that where Ohio State is losing the line of scrimmage, the question is with the wide receiver talent that will be playing, are they explosive enough to make up for it? And I guess we won't know until we see it because we haven't seen any of these new guys play yet for the most part, or at least not in the spotlight. So um, to me, I think I favor Utah um, to at least cover the 4.5 point spread, if not to win this game. Um, they're just an extremely physical team. And I just think that style of play really matches up well with this Ohio State team.
I 100% agree. You hit it right on the head. You saw what Michigan was able to do in that game against Ohio State. Physical, pound the football. We're just going to run this thing right down your esophagus, and we're going to pound it over and over again until you can stop it. And I think with the personnel that Utah has, the style that Kyle Whittingham likes to deploy and use offensively with this Utah team, it's going to be a lot of running the football and then play action off of that. That's what I think it's going to be. And then you look at the other side of the ball, I do think that with Utah's defense ranking 12 in the country and yards allowed per game, and having two outstanding edge rushers in Devin Lloyd, who's the name you need to know. He's going to be a first-round pick potentially if he declares for the draft. He's an All-American, Pac-12 Defensive Player of the Year for his efforts this year. He's a guy that can defend the run, get after the quarterback, drop back in coverage, and his sacks ultimately reflect that. 106 tackles, 22 tackles for loss, 8 sacks, and 4 interceptions. He can do a little bit of it all. And then the other guy, I'm forgetting his name, but he's also a they have a potent edge rush duo at Utah, and they're very physical in the trenches. You hit it right on the head with that. So I think pounding the football and, getting an edge rush and pressure, being physical in the trenches will keep Utah in this game. Now, whether they win the game or not is up to CJ Stroud. They still have Jackson Smith and Jigma, who at points in time this season I thought was their most productive wide receiver. But maybe that was just because, Chris Olave and Garrett Wilson got most of the attention. most of the times defenses just ended up forgetting about or not having enough personnel to cover Smith and Jigma, but he's really good. They have a really, really good running back in Travion Henderson that can do a lot of the same things that the Utah offense can do. He's really talented. And ultimately, I still think Ohio State has the better athletes, and that could end up, like most college football games, they could just out-talent their way to a victory. However, in terms of style of play, stylistically, physically in the trenches, I don't think it's a very good matchup for Ohio State. So yes, I would take this to be a pretty close game. I would take probably Utah to cover, given the way that they played down the stretch. Who wins the game will ultimately come down to, I think, CJ Stroud against this Utah defense and what he's able to do without Chris Olave and Garrett Wilson.
Right, exactly. I'm with you 100% there. Unless you have any more to say, I guess we can move on to the next one. And that is Ole Miss versus Baylor.
Ole Miss and Baylor in the Sugar Bowl.
Yep.
What are your thoughts?
Well, it's just, if Matt Corral is playing, I mean, does Baylor have enough firepower to even keep in touch, really? I mean, I know Baylor's defense is really good, but at the same time, I mean, Matt Corral has done this all season in the SEC, facing tough defenses, throwing the ball in the tight windows. So I think this Ole Miss offense is going to get there. It's just going to come down to whether Baylor can score on the other end and keep this a close game. I think Ole Miss is the better team, to put it simply. And I don't think it'll be a blowout, but I think it'll be somewhere in the 38-24 type of range for Ole Miss.
Well, I think the first thing I think that was surprising was the fact that Matt Corral actually chose to, play this game. But, we can get to that another day because we saw Kenny Pickett, the quarterback for Pittsburgh, ultimately opt out of his bowl game tonight. And Pittsburgh lost to Michigan State, but that's a whole other story for another day. I just think it was surprising and honorable that he's staying to finish out what he started. And he's obviously been a difference maker. And if Ole Miss is going to win this game, you're probably right. He's the quarterback. The quarterback matchup favors Ole Miss heavily, and that's not to say that Gary Bohannon for Baylor is a bad quarterback. He's not.
Right, yeah.
But we know what Matt Corral has done. We know they have Lane Kiffin. They still have Jeff Lebby, although he's going to be leaving here pretty soon after this game to go take the Oklahoma offensive coordinator job with Brent Venables. Look, we all know Baylor is a really good defense. They're one of the best. Dave Aranda, give him all the credit in the world. You're not dealing with the same type of athletes at Baylor that you are at even Ole Miss, and some of the guys they are able to get. But it's not like Baylor's defense cannot be, they are vulnerable in some ways. TCU was able to go for 560 in their win over Baylor. And six of the past 8 opponents threw for 260 yards or more. So there are some concerns in that secondary for Baylor. But you're not running the football on this Baylor defense. You're just not. So I think it's going to be really, really intriguing to see what Matt Corral can ultimately do and what this offense can do when they're asked to when they're forced to throw the ball. I think I have to give the edge. I have to agree with you. I have to give the edge to Ole Miss just because they're in the SEC. They have the better athletes and they have the better quarterback and the more experienced coach. However, this isn't your, day-to-day, week-to-week, game Saturday, game next Saturday. You have 1 week to game plan. This is Dave Aranda. He's a really smart guy. He's had 3+ weeks to game plan for this. So I don't think you can compare it to, just, facing a normal team on a week's prep. Right. But I do agree with your overall premise. I would give the edge to Ole Miss, but the SEC, we've seen it kind of be, a toss-up when it comes to these bowl games. So we all still know they're the best conference regardless, and it's not very close. But when it comes to these bowl games, you just never know. You just never know.
Yep.
So
any given Saturday.
We'll leave it at that. And yes, this game will be played on Saturday. So yes, that does apply. But tomorrow's games will not be played on Saturday. They will be played on Friday. And the first one is the Cotton Bowl. These are the big ones, the ones that we wait all year to talk about. The college football playoff starts with the Cotton Bowl between Cincinnati, the first group of 5 team to ever get to the college football playoff, excuse me, and Alabama, the SEC champions. So the one-loss SEC champions. So we all know that Alabama has been there, done that. We all know it's Nick Saban. We all know this is Cincinnati's first time. They're overmatched in terms of talent. However, I think the interesting conversation to have with this game is how can Cincinnati make this interesting? How can they make this a game? Nobody really thinks they can actually win this game. Most people don't think they can even keep this game close. Vegas certainly doesn't think that. If you look at what the line is, I think it's 13 or 14 and a half at this particular moment. But I think the question, the conversation we should have is, what does Cincinnati have to do to make this a game going into the fourth quarter? To where we have to, stay on our couches and watch the fourth quarter because there's intrigue and Alabama's not already up, 23 possessions, 3 scores, 3 or 4 touchdowns. What does Cincinnati have to do, in your opinion, to make this a competitive, close game?
Well, number one, I think it has to start with winning the turnover battle and doing the little things, special teams, the kicking game. I remember thinking back to the LSU game from earlier this year with Alabama. I have to believe that the kicker missed like 2 or 3 kicks that game or something like that. I mean, and they weren't even close. So if they can get the little things like that, the little momentum plays where, okay, you can get them to shake in their boots a little bit, you can get them to think.
Yeah.
That's where I think Cincinnati can find the cracks. It's going to be an uphill battle, obviously, but I think, this is why you play the game. Alabama hasn't been a perfect team the whole year. People are going to act like, just because they beat Georgia impressively, that it just fixes all of their problems as a team. No, they weren't. Before that Georgia game, we had questions about them. That's the reality of the situation. And before that game, we didn't even think they were going to make the playoff. A lot of us thought Georgia was going to win that game. So Alabama is not unbeatable. It's going to be extremely tough just simply from the athlete's standpoint, but you have two corners who are going to be first or second round picks. And you can kind of lean your defense around that. And if you're able to rely on your corners, that gives you more versatility to be able to stop the run, be able to bring in different blitzes. So it's all about whether those corners can win their matchups with the Mechis of the world and can't remember the name of their other wide receiver right now, but you get the point. It's all about the little things for Cincinnati to keep this close.
Well, you're absolutely correct. I agree with you. When you have the inferior team in terms of talent, and this is your first time you're going up against the gargantuan that is Nick Saban and this Alabama team, who even in not close to perfect season, where the roster isn't really perfectly constructed like it has been in years past, and they haven't been as dominant as they have in years past. If you were going to face any Alabama team over the past 5 years, this is probably the team you want to do it. This is probably the year you want to face them. The point being is, when you're facing an inferior team, you have to take the game from them. This is not a game where Cincinnati can just go and win the game outright. At least we don't think that, at least on paper. But you mentioned it, turnovers, special teams is going to be absolutely huge. Winning the field position battle, trying to win time of possession, get an edge, turnovers, don't give Alabama short fields, and try to win the field position battle. All that is going to be key. But I want to talk about a couple other things. You mentioned the cornerback against Alabama wide receivers battle. That's really going to be interesting. Cincinnati has two world-class cornerbacks. I think both of them are future first-round draft picks. Sauce Gardner and Kobe Bryant. Kobe Bryant. The 2021 Jim Thorpe Award winner for best cornerback in college football. He's outstanding. Obviously, Bama does not have John Mechie for this game. He suffered that torn ACL in the SEC championship game, unfortunately. But you still have to contend with their other deep threat, Jamison Williams, who's super fast and a weapon. And when I say super fast and a weapon and a deep threat, I mean he had the second most catches of 20 yards or more this season. And then obviously talented tight ends like Jaleel Billingsley and Cameron Latu, who have also in their own respects combined for 12 catches of over 20 yards. So I think, yes, splitting the difference in the big play department, whether that's matching them on offense with Desmond Ridder and his big arm, or just limiting the amount of big plays. And I know it's easier said than done, but if any two cornerbacks are capable of doing it, it's definitely the Cincinnati team. Splitting the difference in terms of the big play department will be a big key for Cincinnati. Another thing, if you look at Cincinnati's offense, obviously we know it's talented. They're physical. They like to run the ball. Desmond Ridder has a big arm. He's going to be a quarterback prospect we're going to be talking about here in this upcoming draft. But one of the flaws of this Cincinnati offense is it gets stagnant at times. This season, they went 3 and out 29% of their offensive possessions. That's bottom of FBS. Sometimes they tend to get stagnant, and that's not necessarily a good thing when you have to go up against a guy like Will Anderson Jr., who, if it weren't for a guy like Aiden Hutchinson or guys like Kayvon Thibodeau and all those guys, would easily be in the discussion for best defensive player in college football. 15 and a half sacks, 69 pressures, 23 tackles for loss. He's right up there with those guys that we talk about. So I think being able to block him will be a key to not having those 3 and outs, because you just can't have those 3 and outs against a team like Alabama. You got to be able to match blow for blow, if you will. The Tide, on the other hand, they're pretty good about not going 3 and out. They're the third best in the country at not going 3 and out, only 18% of the time. And they force opponents to go 3 and out 42% of the time. So even though this isn't the perfect Nick Saban defense per se, they're still really good and find ways to get off the field. So I think that's an interesting dynamic. And then finally, Cincinnati's pass rush, going up against that Alabama offensive line. It's going to be important to pressure Bryce Young. He's a different quarterback under pressure. Now, obviously, at the game of his life against the Georgia pass rush, but this is different. This is Luke Fickell coaching up his defense for the past 3-4 weeks. They have a month to prepare for this. They're going to be fired up for this. They've been ready for this opportunity for the past couple years. Their pass rush, I mean, I know they don't have the athletes that Georgia does, but they generate pressure on a larger percentage of snaps, and they sack the quarterback on a larger percentage of snaps than Georgia does. And I know they're facing lesser competition, but it's still something to behold. So I think that's also an interesting matchup. They have to pressure, find ways, any way possible, to get Bryce Young on the ground and rattle him if they want to keep this close. So ultimately, if I had to place a bet, I'm sorry, Cincinnati fans, I'd probably take Bama minus 13.5. I just think they'll end up winning this game by about 3 touchdowns, end up pulling away sometime in the third quarter, fourth quarter. Eventually, talent is just going to win out. However, you always like to root for the underdog story. This is a great story, Cincinnati. And I'm going to be really interested to see how Desmond Ridder plays in this game. I think, where he sits at this particular juncture in terms of his draft stock is a really interesting conversation for another day. But with all due respect, if you don't have anything else to say, we can move on.
Yeah. Michigan and Georgia, the game of the day, really. Man, I mean, this is going to be a defensive clinic from start to finish, and it's going to be fantastic. Biggest thing for me is which quarterback is going to step up to the plate, because I don't think you're going to be able to run the ball well against either of these defenses. So Stetson Bennett or Michigan's quarterback, who's going to be the guy who is able to make the big play on third down? And it's not even just like the play to get a touchdown. It's just the play to get that third down conversion, or just to take the check down instead of throwing the interception. It's the little plays like that in a defensive battle like this that can help you get points on the board. In this type of game, field goals are your friend.
Well, I think it's going to be higher scoring than people think. And, obviously you made a great point. Cade McNamara for Michigan and Stetson Bennett, who will be starting this game for Georgia. Which quarterback plays better will ultimately give their team a significant edge. However, if I were to tell you that, because we don't think of Michigan as this explosive offense, right?
Right.
And what I said back when we were previewing the SEC championship was I was talking about how great the Georgia defense was, only gave up about 7 points per game the entire regular season. But what I said was if Alabama wants to have success, they have to hit the big plays. You're not going to 10-12 play drive this Georgia defense to death. You're just not going to do that with the guys that they have up front and the depth that they have up front and the athletes that they have on this defense. You have to find ways to get those cheap touchdowns, those 50, 60-yard cheap plays, if you will. So what if I told you that the team that led the entire country in touchdowns of 50 yards or more was the Michigan Wolverines? Yeah, not the explosive offense that we all think about, but they, not Oklahoma, not Ohio State, not Alabama, not Ole Miss, not any of these other explosive offenses that we think about. It was Michigan. And Cade McNamara, as of late, has been playing really good football. I think going into this game, I might actually give him the edge over Stetson Bennett, just based on what I've seen recently. And that might not be fair to some, but I think given the way that he's been able to play and feed off this running game and the identity that Michigan has, that's going to keep this game competitive. And Aiden Hutchinson is an absolute problem. And he's out to prove something. So I think in the Georgia offensive line, if you have to pick a weakness in this team, I think it would be the offensive line hasn't necessarily been great throughout the entirety of the season, just in terms of pass protection. And that's why that's played a role in some of the struggles of Stetson Bennett at times. I think Georgia has the better athletes. I think they have the better roster. I think they have more depth. I think they'll end up winning the game. However, don't put it past Michigan, man. They're here. They're ready to prove something. And I think if I had to place a bet against the spread, I think I might take Michigan plus 7.5, but Georgia to ultimately end up winning the game.
Yeah, I'm right with you there. I think there's going to be a tight game. I think probably in the high teens, maybe low 20s range. Yeah, I think this is another one of those games where it just comes down to the big like momentum shifts. I mean, look back to Ohio State and Clemson, the playoff game from, was that last year? I can't even, that feels like so long ago. I think it was last year. It came down to basically, I don't even remember what the play was, but there was a play in the third quarter that was really controversial. I just remember everybody being pissed about it, especially obviously on Ohio State's side of the coin.
I know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, I think we're going to get two really good games. I think we're going to see Cincinnati come out and surprise some people early with the way that the fire and the intensity that they'll be playing with. They might surprise Alabama, shock them a little bit, but I think ultimately think Alabama will pull away at some point, win by about 21, 3 touchdowns or so. And then obviously the Orange Bowl, the later game, the Georgia-Michigan game, the game everyone's going to be watching. As you said, it's going to be physical. It's going to be a lower scoring, we expect, game, defensive battle, run the football. whichever quarterback makes more plays late will ultimately win the game. Whichever team's better on third down, whichever team is ultimately better in the red zone will end up having the edge. My pick, and I know people don't want to hear it, it's going to be Alabama Georgia rematch in the national championship. However, I won't be one bit surprised if Michigan finds a way to beat Georgia. I know that's crazy considering where we were about this time last year with the state of Jim Harbaugh in Michigan, but I think things have changed drastically with the way they finished the season and the identity that they were able to find. So my pick is going to be the SEC championship rematch, Alabama, Georgia. However, I won't be one bit surprised if Michigan ends up pulling off the upset.
Yeah, and I'm going to agree with you, but I just think something about this Michigan team, man. I think their confidence level is so high right now. I think they've got a real shot of winning it all this year. That's all I'm going to say. And with that, I mean, if you got nothing else to say, I think we can sign it off here.
Yeah, I think that's going to do it. A great episode. We'll obviously be back sometime next week to recap these games and preview the national championship. We're going to have more NFL to obviously discuss. We're going to have more NBA, probably not next week, but sometime in the near future. College basketball conference play is on the horizon. We need to get back into that. So lots of things to come. This was a great episode. Hope you guys enjoy watching the New Year's Six Bowls. But obviously tomorrow, New Year's Eve, watching the college football playoff. So be sure, like, subscribe. Both these episodes, the one we recorded last night, the NFL one, and then this one will be up at some point, either tonight or tomorrow, most likely tomorrow, so that you can give them a listen. But if you don't have anything else to say, Emmy, just like Cincinnati's undefeated season, we are gone.
Peace out.